Dear journalists, welcome to our last briefing for today. In the UCMC, today we have an opportunity to see Mr. Alexander Hug. Personally, he is Deputy Chief Monitor of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. Mr. Hug, you are welcome.
Dear friends, my presentation today will be a little bit longer than usual after my rather extensive visit to the eastern part of Ukraine last week. Let me start with a brief assessment of the security situation in the east. Having spent a number of days there last week, I have mixed impressions. I traveled to Dnipropetrovsk via Solidar to Donetsk. I've seen Komiternovo and Shirokine and crossed the bridges in Shastia and Stanitsa Luhansk before I returned back via Kharkiv on Sunday. Donetsk city and its environs, in particular the areas at and around the Donetsk airport, continue to remain relatively calm. An exception was yesterday when we have registered some ceasefire violations. Unfortunately, we are continuing to see fighting in and around Khorlivka. On Sunday night in particular, there was a sharp spike in violence. Our monitors based there have, between 6:30 in the evening and shortly before 11 o'clock in the evening, heard an intense exchange of fire in the southwestern outskirts of the city. It was notable that initially small arms and light weapons were used. Things rapidly escalated with, amongst others, tanks, mortars being used. As you know, both these weapons are proscribed under the addendum to the Minsk Agreement. Their use plainly shows that such weapons have not been withdrawn from the contact line. Compliance levels are unsatisfactory. The sites must do better. We see some weapon sites abandoned on one side of the contact line and relatively very few weapons placed in sites to start with on the other side. We have seen over the past few months in a number of places a tendency for the sites to reposition closer to each other. That is certainly the case in the western and northwestern outskirts of Khorlivka, most notably in the small settlement of Zaitsevo. Let me be clear though, I am not talking about the so-called gray zones. There is a popular misconception that one side or the other has been filling a vacuum, so to speak. That they have been moving forward, positioning troops and hardware in contested areas. Even that the contact line was being redrawn. This is a myth. There are no and never have been any gray areas. Only areas not under the effective control of one side or the other. Yes, there have been movements, but not across the contact line. What is true that they moved to more forward position, closer to the contact line, positions previously left unoccupied for whatever tactical reasons prevailed at the time. I understand how it is easy to misperceive things, though. How people are inclined to see such moves as an aggressive forward repositioning that threatens or signals an imminent assault. Such movement, however, is a threat to the security within what is, after all, a security zone. Nobody expects immediate full demilitarization. We do not expect the sides to lay down all arms when they perceive an imminent threat. We do, however, expect that the sides respect the spirit and letter of their agreement establishing a security zone. It is meant to be a place where there is no danger. A zone where unilateral moves and repositioning do not increase fears and tensions. There is already enough tension and uncertainty without adding to it. Unannounced moves have unintended consequences, leading to security dominoes falling along the contact line. The reason I touch upon this is not because we have seen such dominoes falling before. It is rather because of the unfolding situation in areas northeast of Mariupol. Here we have seen that the contact line has not been pushed forward. Instead, we have observed movements into Pavlopil and Kominternove. The result has been a narrowing of the security zone, meaning that armed groups, distrustful and fearful of each other, have inched closer together. Faced off against each other in close proximity, tensions has risen, and inevitably there had been some kinetic activities there. The worst of it came last Thursday. Our monitors heard 38 explosions and numerous bursts of small arms and light weapon fire in the wider area. Dear friends, I appeal to the sides to step back. If what we have seen elsewhere is anything to go by, this violence is just the beginning. I know from my last visit to the area that people there, whose villages have become fortified positions, would agree with me when I say that this must stop. Enough destruction, enough death, enough displacement. Pull back or be pulled into yet another inferno. What I ask for, I know, is not easy. Almost 2 years of bloodshed is in itself reason enough to stop this madness. Also makes it even more difficult to stop it. Trust is fragile even at the best of times, and when broken, hard to put back together again. But it is what the people of Pavlopil and Kominternovo and other places along the contact line equally ask for and indeed demand. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission is here to help in this respect. The sites, in particular the so-called DPR and so-called LPR, need to realize this. They need to let the SMM do its job. Last week, for instance, the SMM experienced 21 freedom of movement restrictions, all but 3 imposed by the so-called DPR and so-called LPR. From them, we hear all too often that such denied, delayed, or conditional access is because of uninformed or overzealous junior ranks. Basically, we are told the problem is one of miscommunication within the chains of command, or slow or misdirected communication between the SMM and those in a position to resolve such problems. I can tell you from my own experience in the East last week that this is not the case. Colleagues and I, attempting to verify the withdrawal of heavy weapons in a holding area controlled by the so-called LPR near Mirne, were denied access. I immediately contacted the Joint Center for Control and Coordination, and we still did not gain access. Another key part of our work is monitoring border areas. And yet, here too, despite the SMM mandate endorsed by all 57 OSCE participating states and the Minsk Accord signed by all sides, we are preventing from doing our job. Members of the so-called LPR, for example, prevented the SMM from proceeding through a checkpoint near Jakova on Tuesday, preventing us from reaching Chernovy-Shoften at the border. We have in fact not been allowed to access this border area since March 2015. Dear friend, worse was experienced by our colleagues of mine in Marinka, just immediately southwest of Donetsk city, on Saturday. They were there to facilitate and monitor the restoration of critical infrastructure for the civilian population on both sides of the contact line. And yet somebody fired at them, hitting one of their vehicles with monitors standing exposed just a few meters away. Thankfully, no one was hurt. The incident followed another incident a week before in Chorlivka, in which their colleagues were forced out of their vehicles and put face down on the snow. All of this was done at gunpoint, so aggressively that they thought their lives were in danger. Endangering the lives of unarmed monitors who operate in these areas in accordance with the SMM mandate and the Minsk Accord not only threatens the well-being of the monitors, it threatens the very foundation of the Minsk Agreement. It threatens the very viability of the fledgling ceasefire process and whatever chance there is of a lasting peace. We naturally informed the Joint Center for Control and Coordination, expecting that a joint investigation into the incident would ensue, that disciplinary action would result, and most importantly, that mechanisms would be put in place to ensure that such incidents never happen again. If those responsible wish to maintain credibility, they must act now, jointly and with resolve. And I should add that I sincerely want them to maintain credibility, because without it, there can be no meaningful engagement or trust between the sides and between them and the SMM. Apologies are not enough. We need effective remedies and solid guarantees that violence against unarmed monitors and other impediments to their work will end. I was particularly struck last weekend in Luhansk on how restrictions of their freedom of movement are a real issue for the civilian population too. At the rickety and steep makeshift footbridge near Stanica Luhanska, colleagues of mine had earlier heard that an elderly man had broken his arm, having fallen on the ice-covered ramp that connects the two remaining parts of that bridge. I myself met a woman there whose daughter lives in Luhansk city. She gets to see her only every 3 months or so, even though only 20 kilometers separate them. The dangerous footbridge is, you must remember, the only crossing point in the entire Luhansk region, and is of course only open to pedestrians. If that woman and thousands other like her wish to make that 20-kilometer journey, she must procure crossing permits and go on foot across that bridge. If she wants to go by car, she has to go to Donetsk. Do we have translation? Good. If she wants to go by car, she has to go to Donetsk, entailing a journey of over 400 kilometers. What should be a 10-minute road trip can turn into a 7-hour long journey, and that's assuming there are no delays at other checkpoints along the way. Civilians regularly have to wait 2 full days to cross the contact line by car. This would make a journey of 2.5 days for this woman to drive from Luhansk city to Stanica Luhanska. Besides cutting people off from their friends and loved ones, the contact line divides economically integrated areas, separating producers from consumers and employees from their places of employment. There are, of course, legitimate security concerns, but I would ask that more crossing points be established, in particular in the Luhansk region, and that procedures are streamlined to allow for safer, easier, and faster crossing. That woman I met in Stanica Luhanska and her daughter waiting in Luhansk city deserve at least that. Again, you may think that I ask a lot, that the ceasefire is respected, that the weapons are withdrawn, that the sides maintain a distance to each other and respect the security zone for what it is, that the SMM is not threatened and restricted in other ways in carrying out its mandate and in implementing various provisions of the Minsk Accord, and that civilians are allowed to see their families and go to work. But I know I'm not asking for the impossible. I know this because of what happened last Friday in Chorlivka, where 46 patients on the point of death were finally able to receive dialysis following the delivery of medical equipment to a hospital there. The chief doctor at the hospital had told us at the end of the summer last year that these people would die if the equipment were not delivered. Registration problems for the NGO willing to do so, imposed by the so-called DPR, however, seemed insurmountable. But we pushed the relevant decision makers. Decency and common sense finally prevailed, showing for me, if people want to do the right thing, it will happen. Regardless of how various parties respond to the issues I have raised today, the SMM will not be deterred. We will continue to press on with our expansion, increasing both our numbers and our geographical footprint throughout the Donbas. We just opened another 3 forward patrol bases in Krasnoarmysk, Sviatladorsk, and Stanica Luhanska. And this week the number of monitors reached 679, supported by 291 Ukrainian staff members. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your report. And we have our first question.
Тарасенко Віолетта, громадське ТВ of Donbas. Тарасенко Віолетта, Public TV of Donbas. Could you please Could you please explain about that code which is required by DPR and LNR during elections which they plan? And the second question, if such fire opened on the SMM mission will continue, what you will do?
As you know, discussions on elections are ongoing. And I would only speculate now if I would give you an answer further to that. With regard to the threats and intimidations that our observers are being subjected to, I can only repeat what I have said before, is that we will not be deterred. We will do the opposite of what they think we should be doing. We will continue to expand in numbers, and we will continue to open more offices and presences along the line of contact. It has to be understood that if the military leadership of those who conduct these attacks are not taking action, they lose their credibility. And if they lose their credibility, the Minsk process will stop. We cannot do our job, and normalization will not come fast. But I repeat again, we will not be deterred. We will continue to implement our mandate as far as that is possible for an unarmed civilian observer mission.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or
Any?
питання по уточненню в залу? Запитань та уточнень немає.
No further.